Hello boys and girls, this is Miss Embry and this is the photosynthesis PowerPoint. As always, you can pause this if you need more time, and you can always rewind it if you need to go back to something else. Alright, for the standard is MS LS1-6. The student is expected to construct a scientific explanation based on evidence for the role of photosynthesis in the cycling of matter and flow of energy into and out of organisms. Basically, the matter that is being cycled here is oxygen and carbon dioxide. And the flow of energy, as you know, energy does not cycle, it's in a linear flow. So, and as you know, autotrophs, which are producers or plants, they start this by the process of photosynthesis where they convert radiant energy from the sun into chemical energy into glucose that you can use and animals can use. Alright, hopefully by the end of this lesson, you can do all of these things. I can define photosynthesis. I can explain the inputs and outputs of photosynthesis. I can explain why photosynthesis is essential. Essential just means necessary or important for all organisms on Earth, and I can explain where photosynthesis occurs in the cells of autotrophs. And remember, autotrophs is just another word for producer. So what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is a series of chemical reactions that produce glucose, which is a compound plants use as food. Plants use light from the sun, which is radiant energy, to make their own food, and that food is glucose, C6H12O6. Radiant energy from the sun is changed into chemical energy in glucose molecules. Okay, so here you have the reaction of photosynthesis, so the process, which is carbon dioxide, or CO2, plus water. Alright, you have energy from light, and it occurs in the chlorophyll in leaves. And your end product is glucose and oxygen. And understand that that energy from light or sunlight, it gets stored in the glucose and oxygen molecules. Now, at the very bottom, you will see where it says 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O yields C6H12O6 plus 6 O2. That is the balanced chemical equation for photosynthesis. Alright, if you add up your number of carbons and your number of hydrogens, your number of oxygens on both sides, they're going to equal out because the law of conservation of mass says that matter cannot be created or destroyed. So on each side, you have 6 carbon atoms, you have 12 hydrogen atoms, and you have 18 oxygen atoms. And that is on both sides. Alright, energy. Energy is basically the ability to do work. We'll talk more about energy when we get into physical science, but energy can be kinetic or potential. Kinetic, think of like motion, and then potential is just stored energy. So radiant energy, it's a form of kinetic energy, and that's light energy, and plants get that from the sun. Chemical energy is the energy from food, like is glucose, and it's stored as chemical energy. So when you eat, the reason why you eat is because your body needs energy. I think about how do you feel before lunchtime. Usually you're a little grouchy, you're hungry, a little bit tired. It's your body sending you signals that you need more energy. Autotrophs. Plants use radiant energy from the sun to make food. Alright, so they're autotrophs. Auto means self. Troph, feed, right? So they're self-feeders. Animals are heterotrophs. This means that they must obtain energy from the environment, eat plants or other animals in order to obtain chemical energy. Animals have to eat in order to survive, right? Plants have to convert the sun's energy into glucose for themselves to survive, and animals have to eat either plants or other animals that eat plants in order to survive. Alright, photosynthesis is a chemical reaction. You can't directly see photosynthesis happening, but you can see evidence of that. So photosynthesis takes place at the level of molecules and atoms. We cannot directly observe it. We can, however, observe the results of photosynthesis. And what you see in this slide is an experiment that Joseph Priestley conducted in 1780. So if you look at the picture with A and B, what he did is he had this closed container and he lit a match and he had a mouse. Well, obviously the fire needs oxygen in order to survive, so it takes oxygen from the air. Well, the mouse also needs oxygen. Well, eventually all of the oxygen runs out. It's full of carbon dioxide and other gases. So since there's no more oxygen, the mouse dies and the flame goes out on the candle. Alright, so he repeats the experiment again, but this time he puts a plant inside. Well, as you see in C and D, the plant, what it does is it takes carbon dioxide from the air, which it's getting the carbon dioxide from the mouse, because remember, when you exhale carbon dioxide gas. So it's taking that CO2, it does photosynthesis, and it converts that into oxygen gas. Alright, well, in the experiment, the things that need the oxygen gas are obviously the mouse. It's just like you or me. We have to have oxygen in order to survive. And also a flame needs oxygen. Without oxygen, a flame will die. And no, flames are not living things, but they need oxygen in order for that reaction to keep occurring. Alright, so as you see in C and D, at the end of the experiment, the plant is still there, the mouse is still alive, and the flame is still lit. So it shows that, with the plant there, oxygen is being returned. So it's kind of like a cycle, okay? Plants depend on consumers, all right? Consumers are herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, animals, heterotrophs, all right? Consumers are just basically anything that's not a plant. They're things that consume or eat other organisms. Well, consumers provide plants with carbon dioxide. Okay, because when consumers exhale, they provide CO2 to plants. Plants need CO2, carbon dioxide, and water, and also sunlight energy in order to do photosynthesis. Okay, when they do photosynthesis, they produce oxygen gas and glucose. Now, understand, with the glucose, plants can store that glucose energy, use it for themselves for their daily life processes, or it can be passed on, say, like when the mouse maybe eats the plant, or a cow eats grass, right? That energy gets transferred, it flows to the next organism. Okay, so plants are relying on the animals for CO2. The animals are relying on the plants for oxygen. Okay, they need each other. It's essential that they have one another. Okay, more about the Joseph Priestley experiment. The plant replaced the oxygen that had been used by burning the candle. Oxygen is a colorless, odorless gas that humans cannot observe directly. However, its presence is required for animals such as mice to live. Priestley demonstrated that the plant could produce oxygen. Oxygen is one of the products of photosynthesis. Also, the other product, or the output, is glucose. Alright, elements involved in photosynthesis. In the entire chemical equation of photosynthesis, you only have 3 elements. Okay, and an element is a substance that cannot be broken down into a simpler substance by chemical means. Meaning, if you have only carbon, you're only going to have carbon, even if you keep breaking it apart. Okay, so that's what an element is. It's the basic building block of compounds, mixtures, things like that. Alright, and so when you see C, that is carbon. Carbon is in all living things. H is hydrogen, like H2O. Water contains hydrogen. And then oxygen. As you can see, oxygen is in every chemical formula that you have. Alright, and there should be an arrow between the 6CO2 and the 6O2. I forgot that, but your inputs, once again, are H2O, which is water, and CO2. CO2 is the gas that producers must have in order to survive. Right? And then your output, so what comes out of this reaction is glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen gas, 6O2. Alright, so your inputs, once again, water, carbon dioxide, radiant energy from the sun, and your outputs are O2, oxygen gas, and glucose. And you can see both of these pictures, they're showing you the same thing. Alright, photosynthesis is necessary for life on Earth. Humans and animals require oxygen to survive. Many organisms evolved to depend on oxygen after millions of tiny creatures called cyanobacteria released oxygen into the atmosphere. Oxygen became established in the atmosphere as a result of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is necessary to continue to supplying oxygen to these organisms. Alright, photosynthesis. All life forms depend on photosynthesis as a mechanism for capturing and using radiant energy. Think about it. At lunchtime, your teachers take you to the cafeteria and you eat food. We never take you outside and say, here, do photosynthesis, because you and your cells and cells of other animals, you can't convert radiant energy into chemical energy. Okay, yes, you do absorb some vitamin D, but that's not giving you energy. Only plants, autotrophs, producers, they're the only things that can take sunlight energy and convert it into a form that we can use, which is chemical energy. Right, plants benefit from this directly because they use photosynthesis to make glucose molecules that are their food sources. Animals benefit indirectly because they must have sources of food. Eat plants to obtain energy in the form of glucose, or eat animals that eat plants. Energy moves from the sun to plants to animals. Photosynthesis is necessary for that energy flow. So, even when we talk about energy flow, remember, energy does not cycle. And we say that because the energy never goes back to the sun. Alright, and what you have here at the bottom is an energy pyramid. Alright, and as we talked about in class, at each level, they're going to use 90% of the energy that they receive. So, only 10% gets passed on to the next level. An easy way to calculate this is to just drop a 0. Okay, because 10%, you're just dropping 1 0. So in this example, it's saying the plants, which are the producers, that could even be algae, say they have 1,000 units of energy, and we call that kilocalories. Okay, if the grasshoppers or the mice eat the plants, okay, the plants use 90% of that energy for their daily life processes, such as growth and reproduction. They use 90%, so only 10% gets passed on to your primary consumers, also known as first level consumers. So they only receive 100 units of energy. Same thing here with your primary consumers. They're going to use 90% of that energy for growth, reproduction, daily life processes such as movement, chasing food, running, eating, sleeping, things like that. So when your secondary consumers consume the primary consumers, or also your second level consumers, once again, they only receive 10%. Right? Easy way to calculate that, drop 1 0. So they get 10 units of energy. All right. Frog and cat, once again, they use 90% of the energy. Your tertiary consumers, and tertiary just means third level consumer. Right? They only get 10%, so in this instance, they just get 1 unit of energy. Okay, notice the way energy pyramids are designed, most of the energy is at the bottom. Right? That's where the most energy is. As you go up, there is less energy available. Also, the number of producers in an ecosystem limits the number of consumers. Okay, and think about that. If you're in a desert, right, there's not very many plants. Okay, in return, there's not very many animals, as opposed to, say, a rainforest, which has an abundance of plants. They have different flowers, different kinds of trees, grasses, just all kinds of vegetation. So in return, because there are more producers, you have a lot more animals or consumers because, there's a greater food source. Okay. Also, say you have a drought, right? There are less producers available. The population size of your consumers are also going to be affected because there's not as much food available. Okay, so we don't need an update right now. All right, looking to the future, can humans make use of photosynthesis to produce fuels? The same microorganisms, cyanobacteria, that created our oxygenated atmosphere could also be used to develop new fuels. If photosynthesis can produce the kind of fuel that our bodies use, it could also produce the kinds of fuels that cars or airplanes use. These fuels would have carbon-containing compounds. The process is expensive currently. It costs too much to develop biofuel from strains of cyanobacteria available. Scientists are doing a lot of research to find ways to bring the costs down so that the process becomes more economical. All right, so that's all I have with the photosynthesis presentation. Like I said, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to comment or ask in class, and I hope that this video helped you. Alright, keep in mind you have a unit test on Tuesday, and please refer to this in your notes in order to be prepared for that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in class.